Okay, this is Max Grossman of the El Paso Taxpayer Revolt, and I'm honored today to welcome former Mayor John Cook as our special guest. And
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And I want to begin by allowing the mayor to introduce himself, tell us a little bit about his life, his public service, his military service.
Okay, well, I was, let me tell you a little bit about me in El Paso first. My dad was stationed at Fort Bliss back in 1953 and 1954, and in 1949 and 1950. And when from there we went back to Brooklyn, which is where I attended first grade all the way through my first year of college. And then finally in 1967 went into the military. And I had an aptitude for languages, and they trained me for military intelligence training. And this was during the war in Vietnam, and they sent me to a one-year Vietnamese language school, which happened to be at Fort Bliss, Texas, over on Biggs Field. My barracks is where the Sergeant Major's Academy is now. So I think I was always destined to be an El Pasoan. After my year in Vietnam, which I worked at, basically I was a spy because of my language capabilities. I'm pretty fluent in 3 dialects of Vietnamese. And my cover mission was that I was the liaison between the Vietnamese and American government in refugee camps. So I had to actually do the community service portion of taking care of the refugee camps and making sure that we had inoculation teams coming in, and that we would have delousing programs, and we would build schools for the children that were in the refugee camps, and that they would have water, and try to give them some vocational training. And all of those things were my cover mission, and I really fell in love with the Vietnamese people during that time. But it was very dangerous because most of the time I was the only American in the camps. So, and part of my cover mission was I was a conscientious objector, which was all, but if you look at it, it really made sense because one guy out there with an M16 is probably going to be a target, but somebody out there who's really just taking care of the refugees is probably not as much of a target. But I was pretty sneaky about those things anyway. So I came home a year later and married one of my Vietnamese language instructor's sisters, who I had met. She and her mother had a restaurant over on Mountain Street, right off of Dyer, and it was called the Saigon Restaurant, and I met her there just right before I shipped off to Vietnam, and we wrote letters to each other for the year I was gone, came back and we got married, and then shortly after that we had our first date. I moved her to Connecticut, which is where my parents had moved to, and she really didn't like it. So she, I think we were married for about a year, and she said, do you want to stay married? And I said, well, yeah. And she said, I'll be in El Paso. So that's how we moved to El Paso. So we raised our 6 children here. 2 of our children still live here, and they have their own families. 4 of the kids left for greener pastures in Austin. They were part of the brain drain. Fortunately, we were able to keep 2 here. One is an educator. She's an assistant principal at Mesquite Elementary.
Oh.
And then my son David works in the cath lab at Providence Hospital. So he's. I used to tell people while I was the mayor, if you want a career in El Paso, medical is one of the things you should probably consider doing, because there's a lot of job opportunities there, either as an RN or one of the other disciplines. And so David had taken that advice and then moved from Austin back to El Paso to marry another educator who was a kindergarten teacher. So anyway, that's sort of the history of how I got to El Paso, and why I was interested in politics and the brain drain in particular, as I would see my children all leaving here so that they could get a job.
Right. And what was your career before you entered public service?
Okay, I was working as a Western Electric installer.
Okay.
And I took a 3-year leave of absence to join the military in '67. I was one of those crazy guys who was volunteering to go to Vietnam, not trying to get out and not go there. And I think I burned my library card instead of my draft card. So, but anyway, I worked for Western Electric Company, building telephone offices all across the United States. And then finally, when we started having children, it became really difficult to take transfers 13 weeks at a time and travel out to Los Angeles or North Dakota or and all kinds of other places to build telephone offices. So I put it in for a transfer to one of the other Bell system companies, which was Mountain Bell Telephone Company. And then Mountain Bell eventually got bought out by Southwestern Bell. And so I ended up retiring from Southwestern Bell about 34 years ago. I was only 47.
You retired at 47 years old?
Yeah.
Wow.
I took an early retirement. They don't give me a retirement pay, they gave me cash. It was a cash out, and you kept your health care benefits. So it was actually turned out pretty good. And I was also, at the same time, I was a registered representative with a company called Waddell and Reed, which is a financial advising company, selling mutual funds and insurance policies. So I did that for and put the cash that they gave me into those mutual funds, and it had actually done better than me working. The $250,000 cash that they gave me 34 years ago ended up being that, even though I would take money out every year to live on, I ended up having $750,000 remaining after, I think, 14 years. Then the depression hit, or recession. To me, it was a depression, and the value of my mutual funds withered away to less than half. It was back down to almost the same $250,000 that I started with. So we didn't touch it for years. Also, after I left the telephone company, I went back to UTEP and got my teaching certification, and was a special ed teacher for a while.
That was in
4th and 5th grade,
right?
Yeah. So I was a special ed teacher at Crosby Elementary, which is in Northeast El Paso. Severely emotionally disturbed 4th and 5th graders. And I really did enjoy that, but then I was recruited by one of my formal language instructors. His name is John Trian, and he wanted to build an egg roll factory in El Paso. And he knew that, we make some fantastic egg rolls, my wife and I. And so he wanted us to come and work for him, and he knew that I had a degree in marketing from UTEP, so I left teaching and went to work for him, a company called Huang Food Products. It's over on Palm Street, right up between Myrtle and Texas. It used to be a Borden's ice cream plant, and I think it is once again. But we made 95,000 frozen egg rolls every day and shipped them all over the world.
Wow.
I mean, we were in every military commissary in the world. And then, so I stayed with them for about 1.5 years, and then left that and went to work for BN Bavira Senior Health Services as a project coordinator and grant writer. And it was while I was working for them that I decided to enter political office. The campaign that I ran the first time was for state representative against another Northeast El Pasoan named Pat Haggerty.
Right.
And Pat, by the way, a lot of people don't know this, but he used to be the president of the Young Democrats over at UTEP. And I asked him one time, I said, well, Pat, how come you decided to be a Republican rather than a Democrat? He says, I found out they had all the money. So, but that's Pat's sense of humor. But it was an awakening for me running in a partisan campaign, because I'm not really a true partisan person. And I get in trouble a lot of times with my Democratic friends when I tell them, the first time I voted for Barry Goldwater in 1964. And the reason was I liked his campaign slogan, AUH2064.
Yeah, as a libertarian, that warms my heart.
Yeah.
So you ran for
So I ran
city
for state
council
rep.
in '99, right?
Yeah, but I ran for state rep, and that's when I found out that people actually would vote along party lines, and they very seldom wanted to vote for a candidate who was in the other party.
Right.
But I had voted for Pat for years, and then it wasn't until I looked at his voting record in the legislature on things like education and insurance that I decided I would run against him. I only got 1/3 of the vote, I believe. And we were sitting in the day that the results were announced. I was sitting in the living room with Judge Moody and other people who had helped me with the campaign. And the judge asked, he says, "So what are you going to do now?" I said, "Well, I'm going to get a beer out of the refrigerator and the guitar off the wall." And he says, "No, I mean politically." And I says, I don't have any intention of doing anything political. And he says, "Well, you just spent all that time and money, and you knocked on about 6,000 doors trying to get people to vote for you as a state representative. There's a seat opening up on city council. You ought to get your old campaign signs that said John Cook, State Representative, District 78, put a bumper sticker over District 78 and say City Representative, District 4.
Is that what you did?
So that's what I did. So I got those signs out. My wife and I went back out and started knocking on doors, another 6,000 doors. There were 5 people in that race, I think, and got into a runoff, and I ended up winning it in '99. Mm-hmm. This house, by the way, we found while we were campaigning. There was a for sale sign on it, and we called and ended up buying this house as part of one of the benefits of going door to door. We found
it's a lovely house, and yeah. So it was halfway through your second term that you ran for mayor and won in '05, correct?
Well, actually, I served 3 terms, 3 2-year terms on city council.
3 2-year terms.
Right. So the way that the city charter is you can't run for another office without resigning unless it's to run for mayor.
I see.
So the city council person can run for mayor. So I served out my 6 years as a city representative for District 4, and I learned a lot about city government during those times. I learned about the budget, and so when I ran for mayor the first time, I ended up knocking on 17,132 doors. No, 17,123 doors.
17,123 doors.
Right.
That you knocked on.
Right, and it was just my wife and I. We didn't believe in having other people, surrogates, going out knocking on doors for us.
Wow, it's a tremendous amount of work.
A tremendous amount of work. Plus, I had to do my job as a city councilman. So what I would do is I would go in early in the morning. I would find the 13 busiest intersections in El Paso, and I'd stand there and I would wave at traffic for an hour during the rush hour. Then I would go into the office and I'd do whatever business I had to do in the office until about 1:30. My wife would show up with a little igloo ice chest with a couple of sandwiches in it and a couple of bottles of water, and we would knock on doors until it got dark. And
right.
So at the end of that campaign, we got into a runoff, and we ended up winning in the runoff election. I remember the day that I told my wife we were going to run for mayor, and she says, "Well, so how much money do we have?" I said, "Well, we don't have any money. How are we going to get elected?" And I said, "We're going to do the same thing we did for city council. We're going to knock on doors." And she said, "Well, how many doors do you think we have to knock on?" I said, if we go into a runoff, we're probably looking at 6 months campaign.
So how much money did you raise for your 2005 mayoral run?
Hardly any. I think maybe $15,000-$20,000.
That's it.
Yeah.
Because now to run for mayor, you need $1 million. It's incredible.
Well, I defeated Mayor Wardy, who spent over $500,000, and we spent $60,000 total.
That's
including the money that I took out of my retirement fund.
Now that's inspiring.
Right.
That's hard work.
And I remember the night we won. We were driving. One of the local attorneys hosted a victory defeat party, whatever it's victory/defeat, whatever it was going to be, at their law office, and my wife and I catered it for ourselves, and we were driving there, and the early election results came in, and Wardy was ahead, significantly ahead. So my wife got pretty depressed, after knocking on 17,123 doors, and all of a sudden you hear on the radio that it looks like you lost the race. So I said, well, let's not worry about it. We got a party to cater.
It's like Truman Dewey back in the day, right?
Yeah. So
one way than the other.
Yeah, we were pretty sure we were going to lose, and I said, but you know what? We're caterers in the first place, so because we had a business called the Cook's Catering, and so I said, we still got all this brisket and everything, and potato salad and beans
and egg rolls
and some egg rolls with fried wontons, and so we bought all that stuff up, and we're setting it all up, and then I wasn't paying attention to the results coming in, and the next thing my grandson Christian comes over and tugs on my pant leg, and I said, what's up, Christian? And he says, does that mean I'm the deputy mayor? And I said, what? And I picked him up, and he says, he's talking to me, and I'm not really paying as much attention as I should. And then my campaign manager comes up and he says, Mayor, you won. And I said, you're kidding. And he says, no, you won. And they hand me the shoes that I used to wear campaigning, and I held them up in the air. El Diario put it on the front page of the paper, and they called them the $500,000 pair of shoes.
Wow.
Which basically that was it, because when I told her we were going to run without money, she bought me a pair of shoes, cost $19.95, and we wore them out.
Wow.
And so that was it. So then I served 2 years as a four-year term mayor. So if you add it all up together, I'm technically the longest serving elected municipal official in the city's history.
Because you served continuously from 2005 to 2013.
No, from 99.
Oh, 99 to 2013.
99 to 2013.
That's a long time.
14 years.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
Continuously.
Right, continuously.
Right.
And I learned a lot about city government, and I learned a lot about funding city government. I learned a lot of the things you should do and a lot of the things you shouldn't do. I learned to listen to my constituents, because really the word representative is really important. You're representing the people who put you in office. They put you in office for two reasons. One is they trusted you to do what's good for them. And, the average person is not really going to understand completely the city budget, for example, one of the most important things. So they rely on the elected official to really become a mastermind of that budget, to really know what's in the budget, what's important in the budget, and then to have community meetings with them, which most of the representatives do. They meet with their constituents once a week. It ends up being the same people, the same small group of people. So you have to be very careful not to just let your opinion be what that focus group's opinion is, because they might be entirely different from what your constituency in general really thinks is important.
Right. So Mayor, you've got a lot of experience, and there's a lot happening right now. And city government, I think, is very different from how it was when you first entered office back in 1999. We've gone to a city manager form of government, first Joyce Wilson and then Tommy Gonzalez. And I'm very curious to know your opinion on a number of key issues. And I'd like to start with debt. The city of El Paso currently owes $852 million in principal and interest on CO debt. That's certificates of obligation, which is non-voter approved debt. That is more than the 5 largest cities in Texas combined. Well over half of that was issued in the Tommy Gonzalez years. And the debt wasn't necessarily for emergencies. A lot of it went into cost overruns on quality of life bond projects and other things that a lot of people felt belonged in the general fund. The scale of debt issuances without voter approval is way beyond anything that you saw when you were in office. And I'm wondering how you feel about that.
Let me tell you what my philosophy on certificates of obligation are. There's certain things that the voters elect somebody for that they expect them to do, and they expect them to pay for it. They don't expect them to come and say, hey, do you want me to pave your streets? Do you want me to hire police officers? Do you want a good fire department? Those things, they expect the elected official to take care of those things.
Within the general fund budget.
Right. So if, for example, you have something that is related to paving the streets, to issue a certificate of obligation for that, in my mind, is the correct use.
Why not a general obligation bond? Trust the voters to decide whether or not that expenditure should be made.
Because the voters expect you to pave the streets. They expect you to hire the police officers. They expect you to build the fire departments. They don't expect you to come and ask every time you want a street paved, hey, do you want your street paved or not? And then if I was to ask that question to a voter, he would say, well, is my street going to get paved, or are you going to pave somebody else's? You know?
Right, but the problem is this. What if a city is not very careful with its general fund and spends large sums of monies on capital improvement projects and other things, and then all of a sudden runs out of money for roads, and they say, oh, we need $250 million for roads. Is it going to be a GO or a CO? Let's just do a CO. You see where I'm going?
Yeah, I see where you're going, but like I say, I think people elected you to look at the entire budget, and they don't really expect you to come back and ask for permission for every expenditure that you have. There's certain things that they expect you to perform and provide.
Right. Now,
there's other questions though, which my philosophy had always been: certificates of obligation should not be used for everything. They should be used for some things, but there's certain things that they shouldn't be used for. And one of those things, and if you put it into a category, I call the quality of life.
Right.
So the quality of life issues, for example, your parks, your museums, your libraries, all of those issues, your soccer fields, your baseball fields, all of that stuff is quality of life. And
right.
That's where you should go out and ask the voter, do you are you happy with your quality of life, or do you think we should have more parks?
Right. Now, when you finished your final mayoral term, the city accounted for 25% of the total property tax bill of El Pasoans.
Right.
Now it's pushing 30. And a lot of that rise in, the city now eats up a larger portion of that pie. The other 4 taxing entities account for the rest, right? $852 million in principal and interest on 10 COs, including $64 million in cost overruns on the 2012 Quality of Life bond. Do you think that the scale of that is excessive?
Yes, I do. And probably, in retrospect, probably what should happen is, instead of the taxing entities pointing their finger at the other taxing entities, they should get together and communicate.
Now, I'm 100% with you there. That's
what they should do is, your school district, which is the biggest portion of your tax bill, should be communicating with the city and the county at least to figure out, what can the taxpayer afford? What's reasonable for us to expect them to be able to do? And this argument of, well, we want the property values to rise so that we can get more revenue is a ridiculous argument. that shouldn't be a reason for wanting property values to
Right.
rise.
And just to review, we've got 5 taxing entities in El Paso. We have the city, the county, UMC, EPCC, and then the local school district. And there are 9 local school districts in El Paso County. EPISD, Socorro, and Isleta being the largest. Let's talk about that a little bit. Now, in the Tommy Gonzalez years, in particular the years of D. Margo as mayor, the city issued a lot of debt. And the budget now stands at $1.3 billion. There was a lot of growth there. We have over 6,000 city employees now. And now that we're entering a different phase, I'm talking particularly about Brian Kennedy, Art Fierro, Joe Molinar, to a large extent the mayor. There's been a major shift back to fiscal restraint. And so this year is the first year since you were mayor that the city is not raising taxes, right? We're at the no new revenue rate for the first time since before Tommy Gonzalez. In addition, it's the first year in modern memory that not $1 of bond debt is going to be issued. And it's been announced that the CFO and city manager are being directed to go for no new revenue in fiscal year 2025 if possible as well. And all of this, even though they still have to issue $600 million in bond debt because of Propositions A and B and the remaining issuances from the Quality of Life Bond and the 2019 Public Safety Bond. They have to issue $600 million over the next 5 years, and still they're going for no new revenue next year. So they're really bending over backwards for the taxpayer. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got the county. 5th major salary hike for the Commissioner's Court, 16.2% in one go. Rollover tax rate, which is the highest tax rate without going to the voters. That was just approved. $500 million in bond debt is planned, including $150 million in COs, including for things like trails and other stuff. So, and that's what happens, right? The city pulls back, the county steps in. You know, we got relief on our school tax from the governor, right? From Austin. Our exemption is going from 40K to 100K. And so with the schools pulling back and the city pulling back, the county steps in. And just like you said, there's no communication among the 5 taxing entities to do what's right for the community and to keep us at a level that's comfortable for the taxpayers. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. And that's why I say that there should be that communication. I need to point out something, though. You know, you talk about the Tommy Gonzalez years. Mm-hmm. The city manager form of government only works if the vision, the mission, the goals, the hiring of the city manager, the evaluating the city manager is done by a very active city council.
Right.
Now, if, you know, somebody once told me, he says, well, how do you like working on the weak mayor form of government? And I said, it's only a weak mayor form of government if you have a weak mayor.
Right.
You know, if the Tommy Gonzalez could not issue any debt, the city council issues the debt.
That's right.
So
but oftentimes
if the city council is not engaged,
right,
and not paying attention to the debt, or really doesn't care about the debt, then the city manager can do whatever he wants. But I really think what should happen is your elected officials really need to be, as I said right in the beginning, needs to really pay attention to the budget. When we had budget hearings, when I was the mayor, we had carried over what the budget hearings had been under the strong mayor form of government, which the mayor would present a budget to the city council, he'd leave the chambers, and the elected officials remaining, which is the city reps, would spend a month working on the budget. They would have each department come in and present their budget. I changed things a little bit when I came in as the weak mayor, and I said, well, you know what? Anybody wants to change anything in the budget, what you have to do is submit a request, and I'll keep track of all the requests, and we'll present them. But here's the deal. If you want to add something to the budget, you need to tell me where you're going to get the money from. And if you want to take away from somebody's budget, you're going to tell me what you're going to do with that money.
You see, you presided over the end of an era, right? I mean, our city was founded in 1873, and we never had a city manager until 2005, right? 2004, pardon me, Joyce Wilson.
And I was a big proponent of the city manager form of government because I thought that what should happen is you should get somebody who's actually been trained to be to manage budgets, to understand financing debt, to understand all of those tools which the average guy who knocked on a bunch of doors, 6,000 doors to get elected city representative, might not know how to use all those tools. So you've got you need somebody in there who actually understands how those tools work and can give the recommendations to the city council. When I got elected mayor, the first thing we did was we held a community meeting. It was a 3-day event. We used the convention center for it. And we told everybody in the community, we want to hear from you. We want your opinions. We want to know what's important to you and what's not important to you. And at the end of that meeting, it was really daunting because you had so many diverse things that people wanted. And it was, to me, it was extremely challenging. It reminded me of when I retired from the phone company and my wife and I sat down at the kitchen table and she came up with the honey-do list of all the things I hadn't done when I was too busy working for a living. And I think 3 or 4 months went by and my wife breaks out the list and she says, you know, John, you haven't done one thing on this list. I said, I know, because the list is depressing. I said, it's like 2 pages long.
Right.
I said, every time I look at it, I don't want to do anything. So she got a piece of paper and she went and wrote on it, paint the living room. And she said, here's your new list. By the end of the week, that living room was painted. That was on the original list too. So when we got all this input from the community, what people wanted, what they wanted from their city government, the next thing we had to do is to whittle it down as to what the city council thought we should set as our priorities. That small list, the paint the living room list. Okay. So we had come up with things that we thought were important. Downtown revitalization was one. Protecting our open space and improving our open spaces was number 2. Providing transportation systems, including mass transit, pedestrian transit, hike and bike trails, your city streets, and your highway systems. All of that had to be in there. And we had whittled it down to 4 major priorities that we thought were going to be really important and that we would focus on. We did that. There was a strategic planning session that the council had. We bought a facilitator in to help us walk through it, to put the stuff up on a chalkboard, and then narrow it down to planning your vision, your mission, your goals for the organization.
Right. I've served on boards where I do the same thing, the brainstorming.
So we did that, and that that's how businesses are run.
Right.
They set their vision, mission, and goals for the business.
So,
and then from that point on, what was the next step that we had to take? Joyce then sat down with her staff for another 3 days, and they said, here's the vision that the council has. Here's the goals that they've set for us. How are we going to accomplish them? How are we as a team going to make sure that we do what the council wants? That's how a real form of the city manager government is supposed to work.
Right.
It's not supposed to work where the city manager comes up with the vision, the mission, and the goals. It's where the council comes up with them.
Right, but during the Tommy Gonzalez years, there was little active input from the city council compared to in your years.
So I don't blame Tommy for that.
Yeah, it was the
if the horse is running loose, it's because nobody's grabbed the reins.
Well, I go a step further. There's some powerful interests in El Paso who had, I'm not going to say special access, but they had an open door to his office and the Office of Economic Development, and a lot of the spending priorities were driven by a relatively small number of people, with the city council basically rubber stamping. Is the perception.
Well, and just look, ask your city council members now how many days they spend on the budget.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Well, it's definitely not a month.
Let me ask you some specific things. Let's talk about the population, which is something that very few people want to talk about, but it's a big elephant.
It used to be growing at 5% a year.
It was growing at a rapid clip, and let's look at the numbers. So from 2010 to 2020, which is the last U.S. Census period, the population of Texas grew between 15 and 16%, whereas El Paso grew by less than 5% in that same 10-year period.
Right.
But since 2017 to the present, the population of El Paso, the city, has declined by 6,000 people. County's gone up anemically a little bit, but the city's lost on average 1,000 people a year net. And you ask people why this is happening. If you ask me, I would say high taxation is the number one culprit, just because I see how many people, including my own mother,
that is
Mexico.
Yeah, that is one of the culprits.
Others talk about the brain drain, like 4 of your 6 kids who just can't find the opportunity here. Mayor, why is the population of El Paso declining?
I believe it's for several reasons. One is I think that families like my family, I grew up one of 7 children. I raised 6 children, and now my children might have 3 children. So that's one thing. I think the size of families that people want to have and can afford to have has changed.
Shouldn't that be the same across Texas, more or less, though? We're in a community where traditionally there have been large families.
Try to compare El Paso with Austin, and it doesn't work because Austin attracts people from all over the United States who want to come in and enjoy the Texas sunshine, and there's job opportunities for them there, especially in the computer fields and the technology fields. So they're attracting people. It started out with Texas Instruments, and now it's expanded to you have all these different computer companies are attracting people to come into Austin.
Okay, so demographics, lack of opportunity. Do you feel that our tax rate, which is at a record high, not tax rate, tax burden, let's be clear, our tax burden with respect to our wages is a factor in the decline of our population?
I think it probably has some impact. I don't know if it's the major impact. I mean, people complain about it once a year when they get their tax bill.
Right.
That's typically when they're paying the most attention to it.
But I can tell you, Mayor, that while the population of El Paso declined these 6 years, we've seen double-digit increases, almost 15% in Santa Teresa, Sunland Park, and Las Cruces. And people are not moving there for the amenities. They're moving there to get away from our taxation.
Well, and they have the amenities here, so they can have their cake and eat it too.
Right. Yeah. Which makes it all the more imperative that we are careful about taxation for that reason, because we live right on the border of a state where for a 3,000 square foot home, you're going to pay under $1,500 a year in taxes.
And hope you get good water.
And fire department and everything else.
Yeah, right. You basically get what you pay for. But if you live right next door to a community that has no income tax, and that was one of the things that Senator Shapley really campaigned on. One of the things that he and I really agreed upon is the problem in Texas is we sit on a 2-legged tax stool. You have basically sales tax and property tax. In New Mexico, you have sales tax, property tax, and that third leg is called income tax. So when I was working for the telephone company, and I told you I retired 34 years ago, I was making $70,000 a year. Okay, and now my last job as the mayor, I think I was making $28,000. I think that's what the mayor's salary was back then, 28, 30, something like that. I think it's a lot more now. But I'm paying more in real estate tax and sales tax than when I was making $70,000 a year.
Right.
But it would have made more sense if, while I had the income, if I was paying the income tax, and then when I'm not having the income, I'm not paying the high taxes on my income because I'm not making the income, and that burden has been shifted away from my property tax and my sales tax.
Yeah, I mean, I bought my home on the west side in 2010. I paid $6,500 a year, and now I pay $9,200. My tax burden has risen ahead of inflation and ahead of the rise in my wages. And I think that's true for just about everybody in the middle class here. We're all getting squeezed by our property tax burden. But let me ask you specifically about two capital improvement projects, if you don't mind. I'd like to talk about the ballpark, which is always an interesting topic, and the arena and the quality of life bond. Foul ball. So the ballpark. Just to review, Wilson told the public it would be a $50 million project, and then the price was adjusted to $64 million. And then City Hall and the Insights Museum were demolished, which had a combined valuation of $14.8 million. And that was after extensive renovations on City Hall to upgrade the building. It's flattened. We lose that asset. And then the City Hall is dispersed into 5 buildings. And today, the City Hall is in 7 buildings. Each one of those facilities had to be separately upgraded, renovated, separate parking, separate maintenance, staff, and so on. And running the numbers just about 3 or 4 years ago, we were at well over $150 million. If you add everything up, the total cost of the taxpayer. Now, I know that the voters did not get to vote on whether or not we're going to have a ballpark, but they did get to vote on whether or not to earmark HOT tax, hotel occupancy tax, to sustain it. And the voters supported that, raising our hotel occupancy tax from 15.5 to 17.5%, which is one of the 10 highest rates in the United States. Okay, and today the ballpark requires $4.2 million in hot tax subsidy to stay afloat. Thankfully, there's no longer a general fund subsidy since 2022, but the hot fund subsidy between $4 and $5 million to keep it afloat. And we sell property, we lease parking spaces for $1.21 a space to Mountain Star, which then turns them over for $10 to $15 at each event. The CFO stood in front of City Council a couple of years ago and called it a bad deal. Was it a bad deal?
Yes. Short answer, yes.
Okay. Interesting, Deb. Please elaborate.
Number one, I never looked at the baseball stadium as being an economic generator. Okay,
it's an amenity.
Right. It's something to do, and I even had the argument back then. I take my kids to Cohen Stadium, my grandkids to Cohen Stadium, and we don't stop for a beer and dinner after. So it's people go to a baseball stadium and they might buy a hot dog and some popcorn while they're there, but they're not going to go and do some shopping downtown while they're there. So, a ballpark in downtown is not, in my humble opinion, is not really a big economic driver.
We've been told repeatedly by the city, not in your administration, but during the Tommy Gonzalez years, that it's a major economic generator that has positive impacts for downtown, but I've never seen a report. I've never seen data to back that up. Have you?
Well, if people are coming in to go to from out of town, it could have an economic impact for them to stay in the hotel, eat in the restaurants. But I think it's minor.
Yeah, the only hotel that really benefits is Cher's Hotel, which has a contract with the Chihuahuas team, right? Can we really say that people are coming into downtown and staying in hotels to watch AAA baseball?
I said it's minor.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it's a major impact. So then your answer has to be, well, what is the purpose of a baseball stadium? And it's called quality of life.
Okay.
Okay. So in the best of worlds, we would have put it up for a quality of life issue. But the reality is every time that we've had any kind of arena or sporting bond issue go to the voters, whether it's the city or the county, they have said no.
Right.
They said no.
So
we found a way to get around it. I say we because I have to take some of the responsibility because I was in city government at the time to do it without voter approval. Even though I might not have approved of it, the mayor didn't get to vote on things. He only got to break a tie, and that was definitely not a tie.
I know you were in Denver at the League of American Cities. You were running for president at the time of the key vote to demo City Hall.
And I got very upset about that because it was added to the agenda at the last minute.
Why don't you use your veto?
Because I'm sort of like Nancy Pelosi. She never put anything on
don't
the
be
House.
like Nancy Pelosi.
She never put anything on the House floor unless she had the votes.
Right.
I was not going to put a veto up unless I knew I had the votes that it wouldn't be overridden.
And you would have been overridden.
I would have been overridden.
Okay.
Yes.
So
and then another thing is, when I was debating as to whether or not to use my veto for that, which I spent a lot of time thinking about that and debating it. And one of the things I used to go to all of the UTEP football games. I would take my grandkids to. I had season tickets to it. So I'm at the baseball stadium or the football stadium watching this, and about half of the people that were there said, "Veto the damn thing," and the other half were saying, "We need the thing." So I really thought it was the community was split like 50-50. And my veto wasn't going to make a difference anyway. It would just give more publicity to it, and the result would end up being the same. So it was a tough decision for me. I wasn't really a supporter of it, and Woody Hunt and Paul Foster knew I didn't really support it, and I was opposed to the demolition of City Hall.
Were you on the record as opposing that?
Well, the problem is they voted on it when I was out of town. Otherwise, I would have got up and I said, you know what, the only person that has a really good argument for why it should be demolished is Susie Bird. And her argument was it looks like a toaster. Okay? So Joyce sent one of the city engineers up to talk to me about why we need to replace City Hall. And he comes up to me, Alan Schubert at the time. He comes up and he says, well, Joyce wants me to come and tell you what's wrong with City Hall. And I wonder if these guys are having noisy construction work right now.
I don't know. Let's hope not. Let me ask you this, Mayor.
But let me tell you
ahead.
this. We might have some background noise that we don't want. But he sat down and the first thing he says, well, we got a lot of things that have to happen in this building that we have to fix. And we can't fix them right now. And he said, well, what are they? So I gave him a pad of paper and a pencil. And he says, well, first of all, we need to replace the roof. I said, okay, write that down. I said, so he writes it down. I said, now check it off. We already replaced the roof. You know that. As a matter of fact, we made sure that we put a 50-year roof on there, if you remember.
Right.
You were here, I was here. And then he says, well, and the elevators need replacing.
Right.
And I said, okay, write that down.
Let me,
so he wrote that down and said, now check it off. We already did that. And we went through this list of everything, and then finally we get to the windows. And he said, the windows need to be replaced. I said, well, you're absolutely right. The windows need to be replaced. So blow the whole building up because you need new windows. If you needed new windows at your house, you would tear your house down, right? I said, it doesn't make any sense, Alan. And go back and tell Joyce, this does not make any sense to tear this building down. If the reason to tear it down is because it looks like a toaster, or you want this site to build a baseball stadium, then just say that.
But look where the city is now. It's in the old El Paso Times building and scattered about town.
And don't even talk to me about the deal on that one. That was tremendously
expensive. Yeah. But let me ask you this, man. Let's talk about the quality of life bond. So on November 6, 2012, the voters approved two propositions that were on the ballot, collectively called the Quality of Life Bond, and the price was $473.25 million. It was the largest bond ever up until that time. And of course that funds the MPC, the Mexican American Cultural Center, the Children's Museum, the Digital Wall, and then a galaxy of smaller projects, parks, and other amenities, including the East Side Regional Sports Complex. So I, as a voter, look at the ballot and I see $473.25 million. I voted against it. A lot of people I know voted for it, but there was the price. And then, again, during the Tommy Gonzalez years, the cost overruns go to certificates of obligation, non-voter approved debt. And we just learned at the last BOAC meeting that those cost overruns total $64 million. And so the city moved the goalposts and changed the price tag without asking the voters for permission. How do you feel about that?
I don't think that was the right thing to do.
Okay.
Number one, you know, and I got criticism from the administrations that followed ours, that, you know, we didn't scope out those projects the right way. But we did. You know, we didn't scope out that we were going to build a state-of-the-art cultural center. We said, you know, let's build the building for them, and then we can develop it over time. We don't have to do everything all at once. It's going to take years for us to get this done, and not overnight. And I apologize for the noise. We're remodeling a bathroom.
Right. It's okay. Hopefully you can hear us.
Yeah. Hopefully.
So let me ask you this.
That's my tax dollars at work. No.
So the okay. So we agree about that. Now, the arena has been variously called an arena, a multi-purpose performing arts and entertainment facility, is how it appeared on the 2012 ballot. As you know, Mayor, in 2017, I went into litigation to oppose this project. I opposed it because the neighborhood that was going to be destroyed was historic. There were people who lived there who were vulnerable. And the city authorized itself to use eminent domain to acquire private property for an entertainment purpose, which I found very offensive. Do you believe that eminent domain should be used for any purpose other than something essential, like a police station, for example? Should eminent domain be used for economic development?
No.
So we agree about that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. In your mind, what went wrong with that project aside from the fact that Max Grossman sued? What else was wrong with the project?
Well, first of all,
it was underfunded.
Well, first of all, it was supposed to be an annex to the convention center. Okay. The whole concept for it was that, okay, let's get, we can't bring major conventions into El Paso for a couple of reasons. One was we did not have enough hotel rooms. We needed 1,000 downtown hotel rooms. We didn't have that. We were lucky if we had 40% of the 1,000 that were required back in 2013. So we said, well, you know, let's get the business community to build and remodel hotel rooms so we can meet that 1,000-room threshold that we have to have. And then the second thing was our convention center wasn't big enough. So we needed an annex to the convention center. Right. I had even got back with the architect who designed the convention center. I said, hey, can we go to a second story on it? And he said, no, it was not designed that way. It wasn't engineered that way. No second story. So that said, well, you have to have an annex to it that it has to be on a different site.
Let's fast forward to now. The proposal is to build a facility on budget, $180 million, not $500 million, $180 million. That can only buy an amphitheater, indoor, outdoor,
well,
a small one, and they want to put it by the Union Depot.
Number one, that's not what the people voted for. That's not what they voted for. The people did not vote for a 4,000-seat amphitheater in downtown, which is a stupid place for an amphitheater.
They voted for a multi-purpose performing arts and entertainment.
Right. And when I went around trying to sell people on why we needed this thing, I told them the business community is building the hotel rooms. We need to bring conventions in here so people come to El Paso and say, you know, that's a good place to locate.
So why are we
business
building an
to.
arena instead of a convention center?
We should not be doing that. I never called it an arena. As a matter of fact, that was a taboo word.
Yeah.
We did not want anything to do with an
But it
arena.
became one when the city put
Now,
out its
on a
RFQ.
multi-purpose center.
When the city put out its RFQ in 2015, they said 15,000 seat sports arena with loge seating, jumbotron.
That was after my time.
That's right.
Okay. I had absolutely nothing to do with that. Somehow between 2013 and 2015, somebody changed the vision for what that thing was supposed to be.
Right.
And then they decided what location it was going to be. It just had to be close to the convention center.
Here's what I think, Mayor, and let's see if we agree. We spoke about this on the phone. I think we go back to the voters in November, cancel the arena project, and don't spend the $150 million. Come back to the voters in the future, maybe at the election of 2026, for example, and say, okay, we're going to do $200 million bond and $200 million of private money for a total of $400 million, and we're going to replace the convention center in phases, and we're going to build a world-class convention center to drive hotel occupancy, and that's going to be the project. Okay. What do you think?
So I think what we should do is, look, let me give you an analogy. I give my grandson 1 year's tuition to go to college, okay, so he can go to college. Okay. He finds out that 1 year will not pay for the whole, that I gave him will not pay for the whole year. It's not going to work. So what does he do? He goes out and he buys a car with the money I gave him for tuition. How do you think I'm going to feel? So the voters gave us the money for tuition, and we're buying a car. They didn't vote for that. Let's just cancel the frickin' project.
They gave money for tuition to go to El Paso Community College, but then the developers wanted him to go to Harvard. It was only $180 million. It wasn't enough.
Yeah, well, they changed the scope. So, and, you know, I think what we ought to do is say, you know, cancel the damn project because the voters didn't vote for what you want to build now.
Right.
They were not sold that bill of goods.
Right.
So just cancel it. You know, retire some debt with it. I mean, what would be wrong with retiring the debt?
You are speaking my language.
If you're not going to build what you said you were going to build, you're going to build something else anyway. Doesn't make sense.
But you still have people in the development community who want a 15,000 seat sports arena convertible for other events, and they want a huge footprint, and they want the city to spend $500 million on it. They don't want to compete at anything. What do you say to them?
Well, I say to them, you know, people in hell want ice water. You know?
That's good.
Yeah. So, you know, you can't have everything you want. Just sometimes you get what you need.
Rolling Stones,
Yeah.
1969.
Should I break out the guitar now? I think we're going to have to probably get the interview to end pretty soon because my workers just came back from their lunch.
Right, right. Let me ask you then just one more question.
Sure.
I interviewed Ted Houghton recently, and he said that the community leadership lacks vision. And by that he means we need to bond more, spend more, and invest even more. Mr. Houghton, how are we going to pay for it? Just, we need to do it. Right? So,
well,
do you agree?
If you could leverage funding from other sources, from federal sources,
That's
or
his
state
point.
sources,
Right.
Then it probably makes sense.
But you have to match federal funds.
Right. So, you know, does the match make sense? For example, when we build highway projects in El Paso, 80% of it is paid for by tech stock.
Right.
And then the 20% match comes from the local entity.
It's still our taxes, of
Right.
course, but we don't feel it
Right.
in the same way.
Yeah. So it's still our taxes, but, you know, like I said, you can't have everything that you want.
Right.
But you figure out, you know, take that honey-do list that you did at the kitchen table and whittle it down to your paint the living room list.
Would you describe yourself as a fiscal conservative?
Yeah. I would.
Blue Dog Democrat, old school?
Yeah, Blue Dog. I wouldn't actually call myself a Blue Dog Democrat because I voted for Barry. Yeah.
You know, if I had been alive then I would have voted for Barry too. I read his book, Conscience of a Conservative. It's inspiring.
Yeah, well, I think my inspiration of him died out a long time ago. You know, just,
Right. Well, he did say that we should use nuclear weapons against Vietnam. I disagreed with him on that for sure.
well, me too. Especially for I was in the jungle when it went off. You know.
Yeah, good point. Well, Mayor, first of all, I want to thank you for your military service.
It was my pleasure.
I want to thank you for your public service, and I want to thank you on behalf of all of our viewers for this interview. I learned something, and you know, I think a lot of people will find your point of view interesting. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, and I hope that they can whittle their way through the noise that we provided at no extra charge.
It's the economy. It's whirring and booming all around us. People are employed and industrious.
Yeah. Okay.